Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our July OpenNTF webinar. And today we have two people from HCL who are well known in the community, Paul Withers and Stephan Wissel, who are going to talk about Keep, which is a new API for Domino. At the end, we will do Q&A. So there'll be plenty of time, hopefully, for your questions. Whatever questions we don't get to, we'll put up on our OpenNTF blog. First, I'd like to thank our OpenNTF sponsors. HCL has made a significant donation to OpenNTF to basically fund things like these webinars, and we do contests and also support the various user groups as we get back to normal and start having in-person user group meetings. Prominic also donates our entire IT infrastructure, so I'd like to thank Prominic as well. Today, my co-host is Graham Akers. Graham, you want to say hello?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone.
And we also have Jesse Gallagher on the line, who's on the board here at OpenNTF, in addition to our speakers. And also, I should mention, Paul Withers is also not only a speaker today, but is on the board at OpenNTF. Just kind of a shout out, OpenNTF is a volunteer organization. We always have projects. If you have some ideas for projects, if you want to help on an existing project, if you want to help just with the running the site, whether you're an admin, developer, want to help with documentation, testing, let us know. We have a Slack channel, openntf.slack.com, and feel free to join that and message us, let us know, and we'd love to get more people involved. I believe we'll also have some board positions opening up. Can't talk today. So if you're interested in serving on the board, let one of us know. Want to also announce our August webinar. Pulled this together last night. We have Jesse Gallagher and Paul's going to come back and talk about Git and GitHub and kind of take it from the beginning, explain how that works, and talk about how that would also work with, if you want to do some OpenNTF projects and put the code up there to share it. So should be a good webinar. I know last time we talked about a little bit about source control. There was a lot of interest. So this will be a good webinar. You can register at the OpenNTF website. Okay, I think last thing, asking questions. So everyone's going to ask, is this going to be recorded? That's always the first question. Yes, all our webinars are recorded. We post them on the YouTube channel. You can also see them on our webinars page, or see the link on our webinars page at OpenNTF. So if you want to ask questions, there's a questions pane in the GoToWebinar interface. It looks kind of like the image on the screen. Please ask your questions there. We will not respond to your questions in the GoToWebinar interface. We will instead respond to your questions verbally at the end. In this way, it will be recorded. So future people, looking at these webinars can see the Q&A as well. Please ask questions that are related to what Paul and Stephan are talking about today. If you have any other questions, feel free to go to our Slack channel and ask there. So without further ado, let me introduce Paul and Stephan. Stephan is going to be the initial presenter. And Stephan, you should be ready to share your screen.
Okay, so let me see. Now the interesting thing is, okay, screen 2. Yep. Off you go.
Yep, we see it and we can hear you fine.
Okay, so I show the pictures and Paul is doing the talking.
For now, yes. Yeah. So welcome to the session on Project Keep and why you would want it. We've been talking about Project Keep. Stephan's actually been talking about Project Keep since before I joined HCL. But we did the first big deep dive on it and guess which one of us is which one there. But we did the first big deep dive at Engage 15 months ago, I think it was. And the functionality has been growing since then. It was in beta, as you are probably aware now. It's in early access. It started off as art of the possible. It was identified by people in the community that this was of interest, and so it's now in early access. As you'll see in a moment, we dropped the early access release at the beginning of or the middle of last month, I think it was. The next release is coming in a couple of weeks' time, and the aim is then for GA with 12.01. If there may well be features that it doesn't do that you would like, add those onto the early access forum or in the OpenNTF Slack channel, and we can add those to the backlog. So what do developers want? Well, apart from hoodies and stickers, and Stephan is definitely the person to get stickers. He creates some wonderful ones. What else do developers want? So the obvious answer is standards. They want something that embraces standards because that makes it easy to work with. They want choice and choice of how to implement it, and they want familiarity. And we'll come back to each of those as we dive through the functionality. So brace yourself. We've got about 500 slides. Could be tight in the time, but let's get going.
Okay, let's see. I think we shouldn't do that. We should straight away go and demo some of the stuff. What do you think? Okay, so let me go and get out of the PowerPoint and get into the command line. So one of the funny things is we spent tremendous amount of time, like say 30 years, 40 years, to make wonderful graphical user interfaces. And when you look at the modern developer today, the first thing what they do, they open a terminal window because everything is driven by command line. So I felt, okay, what they can do, we can do too. So let me say, I'm going to go and log into Keep. It asks me which of my server, who I am, and of course, my password. So it connects to the server, and what comes back is for the sharp eye. You see two dots in the long string. This is a JWT token. So by simply using my nodes credentials, the web username and password, I can go and log into Keep using the command line. And then I could do funny things like keep pim get my inbox. And then I see a lot of information, and command line fans will know that with a little bit of know-how, can say, okay, let me filter that out, and I'm going to use a tool that is called JQ that takes that JSON that came back and sorts it out a little bit. So I do this same again, and I said, okay, I'm only interested in subject and who. So it goes through, and then you see I had a lot of spider meetings while developing, but you see I can straight away interact with my inbox. But that's just one of the things. Of course, one of the hallmarks of Domino is that we have applications, and we have the what we call PIM, personal information management, short for calendar, contacts, to-dos, and emails. But I also can say not git up, keep get databases, and I simply use the JCube behind it, and it straight away goes out to keep and gives me a lot of information back. And there's a huge chunk of string there, and then is it an active database, and is it does it allow things to encrypt? If you've got a keen eye, you will straight away realize that that string is an base64 encoded SVG image, because that's the icon that we use to showcase keep if you use it in a web UI. If I make this a little bit more readable, I said, okay, I'm only interested in the name and the status. And there you see I have currently 3 databases on my machine that are enabled for keep. So that's one of the important things. What you're going to learn is once you deploy keep onto your server, it does not expose any databases automatically. You have to go and configure that. And Paul will show about that a little bit later. But then I can go and say, okay, I want to know, I see there is a database called demo. One of the things what you will see here, there is not demo NSF, whatever. So we use an alias. So if you got shovel databases around, you update the configuration and your API doesn't break. If you would in your API expose your database path straight away, it's going to break the very moment you want to clean up. And so I'm interested to say, okay, can I go and have a look what is inside of the database? And of course, I played around a little bit and I said, okay, give me the lists. Here we departed from the what you used in Domino with folders and views and called it lists, because this is what NoSQL developers are used to. And it says that there are 2 lists available. And I said, okay, this is nice. I want to have a look, like say what this list contains. And then you can see very easily there is a little bit of a bug. So the title is empty. That's something we are working on to get fixed. So I said, okay, I get lists and I put the ID behind it and it sends out, and bang, I see immediately the view entries of that view, including the unique ID, the node ID, the position in the view. And you see, I just with a snip of a finger retrieved a few thousand documents, and out of just using the command line. But of course, command line challenge is that you can't really memorize all of this. So let me move this out of the way and go to something what we call Postman. That's a tool you can download it for free. There's also paid plans if you want to do a team edition, which helps us to do all the interaction. And there I can go again. I log in. Let's see that a little bit. So you see it's the same mechanism. And when you look very carefully, so you have a bearer, that's a JWT token. It tells you who I am. In this case, I logged in with my own name. And so I used in this case, I used my Nodes client to interact with the API. So I can get started with Keep without needing to deploy to a server if I don't want to. I'm logged in as John Doe, and I have access to mail data, and I'm also in generally allowed to decrypt encrypted stuff. So, and then I can go and say, okay, let me go and say, get me do the same thing what I did before, give me the list. And in this case, I have not configured access to any of the lists on my local workstation. So I said, you can't see anything. So that's the second thing to learn. Like say, first is you enable the database. The second thing is I said, which of the views and folders are actually exposed in the API. And as part of our documentation, we provide you this a Postman collection so you can go and play with it. And the last thing what I just worked on today is like say getting an avatar, and it actually goes and returns nice little graphics based on the email, and eventually until we have GA, we will go out and fetch the images from the database, or if you allow it in the configuration, from Gravatar. So I can go around and read data, update data. It's all JSON based, so we don't do anything strange there. So whether you are a Nodes developer or whether you're a web developer, you will find eerily familiar. But I think Paul has way more interesting things to show. So I would go and stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Paul to show you a little bit of what you can do with this API.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I have?
I think you have to make me a presenter.
Yep.
I'll do that. I'll take care of that.
Okay.
Yep. So let me share my screen.
Here we are.
Yeah. So I'm going to walk through using Node-RED. Why? Because going back a couple of years, I did a session with Frederick Malmborg at Engage in 2019, where I set up a Node-RED Docker server and authenticated against Domino and interacted with Domino data. So we've mended that to work for Keep as well. So the first part is the authentication call, and that's using it's Node.js. So here we're using Axios and authenticating against Keep. So it's the host and then /API/v1/auth, and passing in a JSON object with the username and password. Now, in order to turn that on, sorry?
Just interrupting quickly. We've had a request that you enlarge the font on your screen.
Oh, okay. Let me try and work out how to do that. Any idea how to do that quickly in Visual Studio Code, Stephan? Let's do settings.
Command plus.
Oh, right. Okay. Command. Hey. Yep. Oh, that might be a bit too big. There we go. So we've got the authentication code here, and then in the settings.js, which is a standard file for Node-RED, we tell it to authenticate to use that JavaScript file. What I'm also doing is styling it for Keep as well. So we've got some logos in there, we've got a CSS file, and then that is then built as a Docker image. We've got a Docker file in there, and this will be one of the samples that we open source, as well as a tutorial to kind of walk you through it. Once you've got the Docker file, once you've got the Docker image, then you need to hook it up with Keep. Now, the release that we had Docker Compose files, and that actually makes it a lot easier. So you'll have your standard Docker Compose file, which has the Domino container running as a service, and all we need to do is add Node-RED in there. Now, to allow them to talk to one another, you just need to use the protocol. Here it's HTTP, the service name, Domino, and the port. And then your containers will talk to one another, because Docker Compose will create that under the folder name that you've stored it in with two containers in their own network that are able to talk to one another. So let's go across and have a look at that. So here we have it, and I can't get into the Node-RED admin console. By default, it's open access, but you can add this authentication to it as we have here. So I'm authenticating against my Domino server. Got the wrong password there. And we're in, and because I'm importing the flow straight in, Node-RED has the ability to use projects to store your flows up on GitHub. There's no need because we're populating the flows in for you. So the first thing to do is to do the login. So we set the host once as a global so that we can reference it throughout. We have a credentials node, so that will store your username and password in a separate JSON file, encrypted, and then we do that authentication, passing in the username and password. So if I kick that off, then you'll see it's connected to the Domino server successfully. I'll come back to the other references in a bit. Now, here we're just authenticating straight against Domino. In production, you'd have an external JWT provider, but that requires some technical knowledge to set that up. Obviously, I'm here using it as a dev server. It's not connected out to anything. And so I don't want to have to go through the process of setting up all of that production level security in order to just have a play around with Keep. So out of the box, it will allow you just to connect to Domino and get that JWT token back. The whole process and everything going forwards is the same as it would be in production with an external JWT provider. But it gives you that flexibility, that low barrier to entry. I mean, if I was to go to my Domino administrator and ask them to set up a JWT provider, because that's way over my head, I'd probably be told, come back when I'm less busy, which basically means go away and don't bother me. So I'd be stuck in a position where I couldn't get this deployed in order to try it, in order to show a customer what it can do, in order to get to the position where they want to pay for a production application. We need to get you developers to that position, and that's why we've got that low barrier of entry. So the first flow that we've got here is an import. So yeah, why would you want to do an import in Node-RED? And there's two reasons why I'm doing this. First off, when you step back and think of it, what is a REST service? A REST service is just an import agent that anyone can call. We've all written import agents to import code, to import and update existing documents. Very rarely do we write those without validation and without some kind of transformation. We may take in a code for a department and convert that to the department that Notes expects, for example. That's functionality that needs to be done, and we shouldn't have to trust for someone else to populate the CSV file or Excel file with the correct information. There are three certainties in life: death, taxes, and bad data from third parties. And I speak of myself here as well. When we provide code to other people, there's always a chance that we get it wrong. So it should be the responsibility of whoever has to support that data. And in this case, when it's coming into Domino, it's the Domino developer. It should be that person's responsibility to control the validation. because you can guarantee that if there's something wrong with the data once it's in notes, the person who gets the phone call is not the person who pushed it in, it's the person who supports the database, the Domino developer. So the other reason is Node-RED has this nice node, a watch node. So this can look for a folder and pick up changes to it. So what we're doing is watching the TMP folder, looking for any file there, reading it as CSV, splitting out each line and converting that to a JSON document, passing in column values to field names. And that's our payload. That's our payload for a document. And then we are creating a REST service call to create the document in the XPages Ext database. Now, as Stephan said, nothing is open by default in Keep. So that form has to be enabled. Now you can use that, you can do that through the admin GUI, but all of our admin GUI functionality is also available as APIs. It's API first. So what we've got up here is taking that XPages Ext Keep database, that contact form, and creating a default form access mode. So form access modes, think of them, if you've done anything with Vault, think of it like the workflow stages. You have fields that are hidden and fields that are visible. So the visible fields are your read access fields. You have fields that are locked. So those are the ones that aren't write access. So we've got read access, we've got this ID field, that can't be written. Why? Because when we save it, we want to force that content to be CN equals first name plus space plus last name /O equals renovations. We don't want to trust someone else to set that content right. As the person who has to support the data, we want to enforce the quality ourselves. And that's also why it should be the Domino developer who decides whether compute with form is run or not the person pushing the data in. So we create our form access mode, and that then allows us to create the documents in there and then move the folder. So let me just go to that TMP folder, and I will create a CSV file there, and we'll create JSON Gary, just put a dummy email address in there, and JSON obviously has to be in Orlando, Florida, because we're doing a Domino session here. Now, let me bring up Node-RED at the same time. Now, when I save this, it will be identified as a changed file, and it will be imported in straight away. And there it goes. It's picked up the import.csv, and it's created the document there. Without having to schedule an agent for a specific time in the day and ensure that whoever pushes the data in there does it at that particular time in the day and not afterwards, we can just watch that folder. Node-RED also has nice dashboards as well. So what we've got here is one that's looking at a list of all states in that XPages extension library database. And it's creating an object with the key, FL for Florida, and the name, so Florida. And it's also creating an array of those state keys. And then we're splitting based upon that state key, and we're doing a second set of REST service calls to keep for each state, and passing in that key, this time going to all contacts by state and setting the key. So this is working through a categorized view and getting a single category. And of course, then we take off last two letters to get the state, just because that is something that's been passed on. It's the easiest way to get that. And then the response is an array of view entries. So .length will give us the number of entries. And we can then join all of those REST service calls for each state, sort them in alphabetical order, and create the content for a chart. So if we open up that, then that is in the by state dashboard. And we can see this information pulled directly from Domino on the fly, showing how many contacts there are in each state. We've also got one that's then using those states and again going through those documents, but then putting them into an array based upon the city name. So Arkansas, there's no data. Arizona, we have some. So again, based upon the selection here, it's going back to keep, it's getting the view entries, it's iterating through them, and creating an array of, an object where it's the city name and the number of contacts in that city. California, we've got quite a few more. So that's something that you can do with Node-RED with dashboards. State maps. So we had the number of contacts in each state, and we're doing that kind of functionality now. But now we're going to load it onto a world map. Now, that's fine. In our Domino database, we've got the number of contacts in each state. We've got the state keys. But where are we going to drop the pin on the map? We have no data in the XPages extension library demo database to give us that information. Well, this is where we can go elsewhere as well. Because we're doing it in something that's using REST APIs, we can pull information from Domino in there, and we can also query. This is a JSON object with states and the longitude and latitude of the state capital. So we can pull that information out, and we can merge the information. So we get the longitude and latitude from that Git file, and put in the state name and the number of entries in that state. And that then means that if we go to that page, the world map page, it's dropping pins on the state capitals for each. So Arizona, it's dropping it on Phoenix. We've got a bit of a gap now as we hit the ones with a few more entries in them, but those drop in. There we go. We've got California in Sacramento with 2,407. We will probably need to zoom in a bit more for some of these entries. So Connecticut, we've got 117, New York 72. Let's have a look at Florida, where Howard is. Let's just zoom out a bit. Florida 719. So that's an option where now that we're using REST services, we can merge data from multiple data sources and use them in interesting ways. There's another, Node-RED has a load of nodes that are available out of the box. One of them is the location of the International Space Station. And so we can plot that onto a map as well, onto a world map. So here, the current location of the International Space Station is over lots of water. Yeah, it's in the middle of the Pacific. Now that's great. That shows us the current position. What about where it's been? What about the track of where it is? Well, we've got Keep, we've got Domino there that we can persist the data in. But the problem is, as we've said, Keep is managing the security of your Domino server. using Domino. You can't just write this content to any database on the server just because you want to, because it could break that application. It could result that someone opens it in the notes client and you've got garbage data in the view. It could result in a scheduled agent blowing up because it's got data in there that it's not expecting. We need to restrict the access, not just on who the person is, but depending upon what the developer expects to be appearing in that database. So do we put this in the XPages extension library demo database? Well, that doesn't really work as the right place for information about the position of the International Space Station. Really, we want to create a new database. And the big problem there is I'm on a Mac and Domino Designer is not available on the Mac. So how do I set that up? When we're looking just at Domino developers, that's fairly easy. You're all likely to be running Windows machines or Windows VMs. But if Domino wants to become a player in the NoSQL market, if Domino wants to grow to the kind of size that it was in the 1990s, we need to look at non-Domino developers. And if we expect them to have to install Domino Designer and Domino Administrator and use those to administer the server and create database and create forms and create views, when actually they're using APIs to talk to the data, that's going to feel very clunky. It's going to be a difficult argument to sell. So we've created endpoints for creating a database, creating a form, creating a view, reading an ACL, updating an ACL, adding roles, managing users as well. That's the kind of functionality that is the minimum requirement for a REST API to be your main entry for dealing with Domino. So we specify a file path for the database, a title for it, and a keep alias, because we're creating this not just as an NSF, we're also enabling it for keep at the same time. It makes no sense to create the NSF and then have to enable it for keep. You're creating the NSF from a REST API. You want to be able to use it from a REST API. So we set that up. It's minimal information here because it's the minimum information that's going to be required for using this from a REST service. These APIs are here to be used from a REST service. Doesn't mean you couldn't have REST APIs for much broader functionality with Domino design. That's not the initial target for Keep. It's around REST API developers. And those REST API developers may be Notes developers, they may be XPages developers, they may be Java developers, Dino developers, whatever. But that's the initial target for creating REST services. Similarly with a form, we define the name for the form, the alias, and fields. And for fields, we're setting a name, the data type, and whether or not it's multi-value. It's not setting what color the font is on there. It's not allowing you to set the labels to be magenta, Comic Sans. It's not allowing you to create controlled access sections. It's not allowing you to create tab tables. It's not allowing you to create actions on the form because you can't interact with those from a REST API. And it's functionality for a REST API that is the primary focus here. Similarly with views, you create the name, the selection formula, and the columns. Again, we're not allowing you to define what color the title is on the field, on the column. If you want to manage that, and if you are developing for the Notes client, that is where Domino Designer is should be used. But you can set the sorting and whether it's multiple values. So that will create the database, create the form, create the view. that form will be set up. But actually, we want to set the created field on there to at created. So we need to get form access mode and then update the form access mode to set an on save there. And that's then being triggered. So that's the initial setup, and then we're writing the document to the database every kind of minute. So that's the one that's getting the view of data. This will be the one that's writing to it. So we're getting the document, we're getting Domino doc, which is being set up here with form, lat, and longitude. We're not passing in the created date. That's being handled by what the Domino developer has defined in the in Keep. And what that then means is that if we go to the tracking one, then that may have, let's just check, that doesn't seem to be showing all the data there. Let me just kick that off again. Then what we will see here is the full track of the space station. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Agents. There is a lot of business logic in LotusScript, as I said when I did the webinar on the Voltamex LotusScript toolkit last year. We need to be able to run those. The problem, though, is if we want to kick those off, we have no control over how long it runs. We're creating an HTTP thread across to it, and the agent may take some time. In this case, it's going to take a couple of minutes to actually run. Meanwhile, I can't do anything else with HTTP here because that's hanging, waiting for a response. That's a problem. That's a problem if you're interacting with Domino over a REST service, and it's one that we need to fix. So we have. Now, there's a slight change here between the early access 1 and early access 2. We're calling run agent there, and that's running it synchronously. It's running that in real time. We've split that out into a separate endpoint for early access 2, agent async, and it's a slightly different payload than you're passing in. The payload is then being used to pass into the agent. But what that means is that running that async, we get a response straight away. We can carry on doing anything that we want. And in that response, we get a UUID. So what's that UUID? Well, we're creating a document in the Keep Agents database, and Keep is picking up those documents automatically and running them. Again, we had a bit of a regression in early access 1. It's fixed for early access 2. You can run up to 10 agents at a time. If you run 15, 10 will be running and 5 will be queued. Here we can see that that's still running. So you can pass in, you can call the agent endpoint with the UUID and see what the status is of it. It's still running. Now, what happens if that's a very long running agent? XPages developers have been in that situation where you can't stop HTTP because there's a thread running. That's not good. So thanks to the guys who developed Domino JNX, we've got the ability to cancel an agent. Let's just check. That's actually done now. Let's just kick off another one. And there we see it's running. We want to cancel this. So we can go to agent async with the UUID and as a delete, because we're telling it to delete the running of that agent, we can cancel it. Now when we check the status, it's cancelled. So we've got a whole async process here for running your agents. Obviously, there are going to be some agents that can't be run from outside of the Notes client. If they're set to run on selected documents, that's not going to work. If they've got a selection formula, it probably isn't going to work. If it's using Notes UI classes, you'll get an error when you run it. But and also your agents may not be intended to return the kind of content that will be required from a REST API. You may well want JSON data. But it gives you the functionality then to run those agents from externally. Might be Node-RED, it may be some kind of scheduler, it may be whatever. But obviously then, an obvious need from there is to be able to run an agent once that one is finished. In Notes, how we do that is we set an agent to run at 4 a.m., for example. We set the next agent to run at 4:30 because that first agent takes around 25 minutes. We're not sure, we want to leave a bit of a gap. We set the next agent to run at 4:45 because that second agent takes around about 5-10 minutes and we need to leave a gap. We can pass in a callback URL, and a callback URL if the agent has failed to run. Keep, because it's an HTTP server, can then call that callback URL automatically once the agent has run. So what we get back here, it's pointing to this node because it's gone to the /API chain, and we've got the agent response back. In this case, it's there's some JSON in there as well that you may want to parse before you run the next part of the step. But we're also then kicking off that same agent with loop 2, which is what we've got here in the payload. The request we're going to need to look at there, and hopefully somewhere here we've got the body. Is that the one? That's not actually that's the request that's coming, but we've kicked it off with loop 2, and we've got a UUID that again we can track to see has it finished. We can cancel it if we need to. We can do whatever we need. We mentioned the admin GUI. So Keep itself, it's running an HTTP server. You can get to the REST APIs in Swagger. You can also get to them in Redoc if that's your preferred flavor. Drill down. And then there's the admin GUI. And we've got tutorials to walk through all of that. We've got the users here and the people, because if you're working in a REST API here, if you're working in an admin GUI, you don't want to be switching clients. We've got the databases here, and we can drill into them. We can go to the demo database, for example. We can go to we can see what views are active, what views are available. Agents, there's no agents set to run here. If I go to this database, for example, though, we've got that test keep long running agent that we've just been running that's activated. These other agents you can't run from keep. Possibly a little known fact is that all of your scheduled agents, unless they are hidden from the web, can be triggered over HTTP. As long as there's an authenticated user, they can trigger those agents. Keep, only this agent is available. So we're locking it down. Obviously, we've got the REST APIs, the OpenAPI specs there. But what we can also do is that we can create an OpenAPI spec for your particular database. So here, the to-do keep database, the lists, we've got certain views that are available. And if we scroll down to the name, those are the available values for this database. So we're feeding the information in to give you an OpenAPI spec to give to your third parties. Now that's live. So if I go to the to-do keep database, You'll notice we've got query here to send a DQL query, and we've got code to run live code as well. If I just go to the properties and I go to the config, let's switch off DQL access there, switch off the ability to run code. You can still run the agents that are defined, but you can't run arbitrary code. Now, if I look at that API again, now there's no query option here because we've disabled that. So it shouldn't be in the OpenAPI spec. We've got the agents, but there's no ability to run on-the-fly code because we've disabled that. The OpenAPI spec that is available is the OpenAPI spec that applies to the configuration that you as a Domino developer have set up. Okay, back to Stephan.
Go and restart the presentation. I got more slides to torture you with. And I need to be presenter again. It's like say, make sure that it's the right screen. Show my screen. Yep. Okay. Quick one before I go back to the slides. This one is on open source hcl-tech.sw.com. Domino Keep Docs is the complete documentation about Keep, including a link to the early access beta 1. End of the month, we will have the beta 2. And then let's take it from there. Okay, so what you've just seen, let me highlight a little bit the architecture we have. Like say, at the core of the whole project is of course Domino. Domino has a C API, which we currently support on Linux and Windows. Then we have a middle layer, Domino JNX, which HCL has commissioned. JNX is a little bit of play on word, stands for Domino Java Next. So we realized if we want to do anything, we need to have a contemporary Java API. So the very moment you deploy Keep, you will have a Java API that has proper collections. There's no more .recycle. You can use modern Java constructs. Although it's almost funny to talk about modern in context of Java 8. Then the next layer is that, okay, how do we do authentication? How do we do the HTTP tasks? How do we handle the internal distribution of tasks? We choose the Eclipse WorkX framework, which is an Eclipse top-level project. It's nothing to do with the IDE. It's, like say, Eclipse has a few more things than just the code editor, which is mainly sponsored by Red Hat. And in case you never heard of, you probably heard of Quarkus. That's Red Hat's cloud native Java, which is running on top of WordX. And then last not least, Project Keep, which is driven by OpenAPI. Paul just showed you that we have a generalized OpenAPI for Keep in general, and then a specific one for the database. And always keep in mind, pun intended, that Keep is the foundation for the open client. And some of you might have seen the session that Rashlin did on the future of email, what we have in store with the open client, and Keep is empowering that. So you've seen right in the demo a lot of things around applications and databases, but the same applies. We have the APIs that talk to your calendar, to your inbox, to your tasks, and the likes. There were a few architectural decisions we had to make, we started quite interesting. We started with an OpenAPI specification and then implemented the code, where typically what you find very often out there, for instance, in Spring Boot, you do your Spring Boot application, then it generates you an OpenAPI spec. We did this the opposite around, especially so we could play around with API designs and mocking things up before we actually implement it. Then the web admin, you've seen that nothing in the web admin cannot be done in the API. So if you're good with curl, you can run the whole show with curl or with Postman or with whatever a fancy tool. But to make things easy, we create a web API. You might have noticed that when Paul just demoed that he was localhost 1880, so he actually used the Nodes client for that. It's a little bit wobbly right now, but we are confident that we will have that ready in time. So your barrier to entry is super low. So you don't need to go and set up a server and all that. On the other hand, in our early code drop, we deliver you a Docker image that that allows you to spin up a server very fast and get cracking.
Sorry, Stephan, it's the Docker server that I was actually using there.
Okay, so my demo was on the Nodes client. Okay. The other thing is, like, say, one of the use cases we see is that you got one of your young colleagues developing an Angular or React.js or Svelte or Vue, whatever flavor of JavaScript framework is current. And then you can actually straight away host it on Keep, so you can have your applications up and running in no time. And then, as I said, we have data APIs for data design, the PIM, as well as admin. One interesting thing about the PIM APIs, we follow the JMap data model. JMap is an emerging standard that reimagines how a PIM interaction should be. It's kind of play in word, IMAP, and then JMap, which is one letter next. And of course, it's all JSON based. Then one of the questions, and I think I throw it to Paul, why is this just another API? What do you have to say about that?
It's not really. This is about enabling the Domino developer, whatever the skills they have, Lotus Script, XPages, Java, whatever their skills, to create a secure REST API that they can open up, hand over to anyone, and not have to worry about the quality of the data coming in. There is no language restriction here. If in Postman, there's a code button over in the right-hand part of Postman, where you can get to code for various languages. Any of that code for any of the Postman calls would work. So it's available for anyone of any language. And obviously, in order to configure the databases for Keep, you need editor access to the Keep config. So it's locked down to who sets up the config, but who uses it, it's anyone.
Yeah, so just like I said, to quickly show what Paul was talking about. And like I say, Postman is loading and said, okay, for instance, to execute, let's say, let's pick one to execute this message. I can click here on the side and it will say, okay, if you want to use curl, this is this. If you want to use Dart, this is how the Dart code looks like. This is, it said, okay, then we have JavaScript, C, Node.js, Objective-C, OCaml, PHP, PowerShell, Python, Ruby, and. So you're not limited to a specific language, and anything goes as long as you can speak REST. And in case you wondered, the CLI that I showed you is a simple bash shell script using curl under the hood, but like say we could straight one with just a shell script or a PowerShell script to go there. So let me quickly summarize what have we flown through quite in a bit. So we to recap that, it's mostly in the slides if you download them later to muse about it, so you know what were the talking points. So we got this built-in website that gives you access to the administrative GUI, gives you access to the 3 categories of REST APIs, like say the PIM, the administrative one, as well as the data. There is the complete website. If you find typos or you believe you can explain something better than we can, which is absolutely thinkable, we accept pull requests. So this is all it's all written in Markdown, so it's not rocket science, and hosted on GitHub. You have the live open API spec. So if you don't like to install Postman, or you are not friend with curl, you can do that using the Swagger UI. It's fully interactive. And if you like Redoc better, then you can use that API as well. That user interface, pardon me. Then a quick one, like say what we said initially about security. We use JWT as a standard. That allows us to be sessionless. So the keep server validates, is it a valid JWT token for the context? Also, what are the scopes? Are you allowed to access mail? Are you allowed to access databases? And that allows you also, like say, once you're authenticated against one server, that token can be used for a secondary and third server if you desire and configure the system like this. Question pops up, why do you do JWT and not OAuth? And the answer there is relatively simple. JWT is usually the end product of an OAuth dance. It's the access token, and keep currently basically handles the access token. You see, there's quite a bunch of steps, like say 13 before the access can happen. You want to implement it for production for sure, but you don't want to get bogged down by trying to sort all this out just to get your first internal keep application going. This is why we provide user interface where you just can exchange your username and password for a valid JWT token. You see in the admin GUI, in case you wonder, the door there is the entrance to the Castle Johannisberg in my hometown back in Germany. We've seen a little bit the keep databases. There, the takeaway is that we use an alias instead of the database path, so you can adjust your API if you move your database around. One of the use cases I saw from a customer, they said, okay, we have the approvals and then the name of the year, and every year we start a new database. And if you hook it up with an external application, you would need to change the external application every time. Or in case of keep, you just go to the configuration, says now my approval doesn't point to approval 2020 anymore, it now points to approval 2021. We've seen also that we have access definition, that we can say, do we allow code execution? Do we allow DQL access? So you can refine what the API will allow people to do. And then we've seen the form access mode, that is, they can, based on the actual document, based on the actual form, you can specify what are the fields that the given user can read and write. Typical scenario, like say an approval workflow or a flow where different parties add different things. In the classic REST API, if you have write access to a document, you can override whatever you fancy, including computed fields, included fields that actually don't exist. With the form access mode, we configure that. Only what is defined in a form access mode will actually be able to be read and written. Then one of the things what we get asked is, okay, so Keep is a complete new security system, so no more ACL and all this stuff. And the reality is no. The ACL and reader and author fields have been very successful in Notes and Domino applications. So we don't bypass them. It would be anyway pretty hard to do so. We refine them. I'd say you can say, if you don't have a depositor or author access, you won't create. If you don't have editor access, you can't update. Or if you're not a listed author in an author field, you have manager access, but somebody unticked the delete, you won't be able to delete. So our form access modes refine what you can do. Because, like say, in an author field doesn't tell you these are the 5 fields you can edit, but in the in our access modes we can do that. Just to sum up a little bit the big picture. So anything that speaks HTTP, by the way, the WordX framework we used to have the HTTP port open speaks HTTP2 already. Can talk to keep. You have to have a database configured in a configuration setting. You can do that with curl. You can do that with the admin UI. That's up to you. And no configuration means no access, even if you would be a manager to that database. Then consuming keep, what Paul already showed is, like say, it's all about OpenAPI. What we haven't shown, but that's up to you to look up. There are generators for OpenAPI available. So take an OpenAPI specification and then generate code in any language you fancy. So if you look at that in GitHub, you will find that easily. And then, like say, the wonderful picture of Node-RED actually looks like this in the source code. That's one big JSON string that shows up the thing. Okay, and that's how you've seen that, how it looks like when you do Node-RED. Would you, Paul, would you talk a little bit about beyond data?
Yes, yeah. As we've said, it's important to be able to look beyond the data. If when you're configuring the forms, you need to know what forms are there. You need to know what fields are on the forms. You need to know what agents are there, what functionality is available there for them, and same with views. Now, under the hood, the way that we get everything out currently is with DXL. Now, the problem is that DXL is not a well-known schema. As I mentioned when I was creating a form and creating a view, I wouldn't expect developers to create a DXL file and try to import it in. Our target audience does, though, understand JSON. So what we do is there's a design endpoint that if you've got designer access, again, it's honoring the ACL. Then you can get a simplified view of forms, agents, views, and the same for a particular type of design element, so just forms, and a specific one of those design elements, so the customer form, for example. But you can also get the full DXL if you really want to. Yes, read access is nice, but really, if you're working in an API, then you don't want to have to fire up another client. We need the ability to create as well, and that's what we've got. There are still limitations around DXL, and Stephan has posted the link there to one of the ideas on the AHA site. At the moment, DXL is the only option that we have for pulling that information out and for writing it in.
Okay. But of course, like say, we're not limited to data and design. We have the complete management of the access control lists. So you can create the entries, you can create the roles, you can update them, you can modify them. So you really can go and be a complete browser-based developer with Domino as a backend, with all the capabilities we are so fond of. And I'm pretty sure that somebody will sit down and write a nice GUI for the ACL entries, and then show us how one thing goes with curl and then the other thing using the UI. And one of the things that we considered and said, okay, if you want to use an API, we want to make sure that you can go and do that without installing Domino Designer, especially if you're Mac or if you're on Linux. There's no Domino Designer unless you fire up a virtual machine. And so we said, what are the tasks of a developer might want to do, whether it's a Notes developer, Next Pages developer, JavaScript developer, Java developer, and then we can create a database, we can create a view, we can create a form, we can create ACLs. The forms, of course, very basic. So what we do is simply list them out in a tabular form, because in an API world, the form, the user interface is a domain of our JavaScript writing colleagues. But an API is only as good as its accessibility. And so beside the documentation, I already showed you the page, we created sample tutorials. So Paul spent a lot of time there to make sure that we have tutorials from a viewpoint of a Notes developer. So you're a Notes developer, you get started with the wonderful world of REST and online stuff. So the tutorial gives you that aspect. Or if you come from a REST point of view, you're already familiar, you're a web native developer, then the second tutorial will teach you about what is Domino, the mother of all NoSQL databases, and how to create your forms and views and validations on there. But there is more, of course. So we planned to make Keep extensible. So if you feel like you can, let's say, okay, I want to have a business actions, or I want to combine REST with stuff other than Domino. I have special ideas and special needs. We can go and do that very, very easy. So you need to look a little bit at the documentation, and then the physical one is you take your jar file with your extension, throw it into a specific folder, and then define a JSON file. Here you see an example, and Keep will automatically pick up your extensions and load them. So you can customize Keep to your heart's desire. And then last not least, just a little outlook will be available in Code Drop 2. We have an OData interface. OData is the love child of Microsoft and SAP. And that allows you to go and Salesforce, Excel, or SAP, they can consume and partly update OData. So you can say, open this in Excel is nicely possible. Just already under the hood, this is a little bit what the data, they go back and forth. So our data uses the best of all worlds. So XML for the schema, JSON for the available forms, and then there is a little bit dot notation for the data types. And with that, I'm taking a breath and we're ready for some questions.
Sure, we have a few questions lined up. So please go ahead and ask your questions. Reminder, you can ask the questions in the GoToWebinar interface. I'm going to show that.
Okay. Yeah, so the Andrew at Magerman suspects I'm the tall one. I don't think so. And if you would say fat one, then I would agree. Okay, Jose asked, like say, what's the difference between keep and DQL? DQL is a query language for Domino, which you need to trigger from somewhere. And keep is a REST API that, among other things, can take your DQL query to be executed with a DQL engine. But it also gives you access to views, gives you access to individual documents, which DQL doesn't do on its own unless you have a piece of code that then calls the DQL query. A good example is the DQL Explorer. That is basically, when you look at it, it's an application that then uses some script to send off the DQL query.
I think the other thing to point out there is that we're not reinventing the wheel. The DQL endpoints are using the C++ DQL functionality that John Curtis brilliantly built into the core product. There's no point reinventing the wheel there. We just hook straight onto that.
Okay, so keep uses DQL.
It can do.
It can. You can. Okay. Had a question from Eric. I guess previously there was the Domino Node-RED nodes, and would you recommend now that you would kind of just use keep instead?
The Node-RED nodes were created by Stefano Pogliani. I'm not sure if he's still updating those. Those hook into the app dev pack. For the keep ones, we're just using a normal HTTP request node from Node-RED because it's just a standard HTTP request. So there isn't a necessity for either for a specific set of nodes there. I guess it will come down to whether you're wanting to talk to the app dev pack or you're wanting to talk to keep.
Okay, Graham, do you have a question lined up?
Yeah, you know, those two questions kind of illustrate, I think, a desire on the behalf of Domino developers to understand kind of where keep fits into the ecosystem of all of the different tools that we have to build applications. And I think there's still some messaging, some learning that needs to happen about why I would choose keep over some of the other ways, like, for example, Jose's question about being able to do a DQL query, say, for example, in Lotus Script or Java or whatever. So that doesn't necessarily need to be answered now, but that's kind of an illustration to me of understanding where keep fits and the sort of logic behind why you would want to use it. Any quick comments there? And I've got a question lined up on top of that. Okay.
I think there's a lot of questions, several questions on how does keep position against the app dev pack or the previous Domino Access services.
So Paul, you go ahead.
Yeah, so Domino Access Services or the Domino Data Services specifically, which are what you would use against an NSF, they are basic CRUD. You can write whatever you want there and read the whole document. This is around adding the kind of security that you would want to, as a Domino developer, to refine access. For example, I've had databases where a web app was using a REST API to get to certain documents only. and that wasn't restricted based upon user, it was restricted on form. That's where Keep could benefit there. But Keep is around not just basic CRUD, but also adding fields on the way out, pushing fields on the way in, restricting read access down a lot tighter, having different form access modes to open up different sets of fields, those kind of things.
But beyond that, it's HTTP access, right? It's using APIs to interact with your Domino server as opposed to using Domino Designer to write code directly in NSFs.
Correct. It's using HTTP2. It's not using the Domino HTTP stack. It's using an HTTP2 separate stack, which allows streaming and chunking of the data as well.
So that feeds directly into the next question, and that is, does Keep need to run on the same Domino server where your applications are located?
Keep is basically a Domino task. So the answer is yes.
And then help me understand
you
the
go to the console and say load Keep. You go to the server console and say load Keep, and that brings up the interface.
Okay, and so the availability of the Docker implementation of Keep is simply that I've got server B that is running Keep, and server B can talk to the applications on server A.
No, like say you would go, like say the application on server B are available for Keep. You do not want to go and have your server talk, two servers would talk to each other using nRPC, and that's
Gotcha.
not the fastest protocol for live access. So you would have, it's just the same thing, like see it as a HTTP plus task. So you don't use the HTTP task on server B to talk to a database on server A. Use the HTTP task on server B to talk to applications on server B.
Gotcha. Good question.
Keeps just
Good
the same.
answer.
Yeah.
Okay, Howard.
Following up on the where the different servers are maintained. David asked if they would be cluster aware if you're accessing a database on another server. So I guess in terms of a failover kind of a thing, if your server were to go down, will it fail over, similar to the clustering?
It's, let's say, for the failover, you have the standard approach that you would take in an HTTP world. So you would need to have a something sitting in front of your HTTP and says, if my server 1 is not responding, then fall over to server 2. As I said, it's the same principle like as the HTTP task. If your database is going down, your HTTP task is going down with it. So if server A with Keep goes down, then it's gone, and you would need to have an HTTP failover mechanism in front of it, like a reverse proxy or so, that then redirects you to another cluster. So it's the same thing. Like say, if your server goes down, your HTTP task dies with it. So there is actually no failover mechanism that is native to the HTTP protocol. So typically you have an Nginx or an F5 or whatever you HTTP mechanism you fancy to handle failover. And
would there be any sort of transaction commit processes in Keep that would allow you to commit a transaction and back it off in the event of a server failure or communications failure?
Let's say Keep uses the Domino API. So what Domino can do with transactions, Keep can do. What Domino can't do with transactions, Keep can't do. So we didn't invent a transaction manager on top of Domino. Keep's just like say is an access layer.
In terms of the agents, they will get cancelled when Keep shuts down. You can go into the Keep agent database, change the status back to pending, and they'll get picked up. So you can restart those particular agents. It may be, depending on from agent to agent, it may not be appropriate to restart that agent. So there's nothing automated there, but any agents that are still queued up will sit queued up, and when keep starts up again, those will get picked up and started.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left, sifting through. Actually, there's a very quick question here, and then I've got another one that's maybe a longer answer. The quick question is, Keep part of Domino, or it's an add-on like Versa, the app dev pack?
Technically, it's an add-on like Versa. The current plan is it will be shipping together with Domino 12.01. We haven't fully settled on, like, say, how the install mechanism will be. That's a mainly a bandwidth question of the team in charge of the installer, whether we have it ideally integrated that it's a tick box option, please install this, like you have a tick box option for the various tasks, or whether it's a separate install. The other consideration where we're very interested in your feedback is Domino has a very clear cadence with releases. The Keep REST API has a potential to deliver new values more frequently. If we tie it into a Domino release, we are kind of tied to the Domino release cadence.
Great. Okay. I want to go back to this one because I think it's a little bit longer answer. The question is, could you elaborate? There was a comment in the presentation about hosting static web apps in Keep.
Okay, so static web apps, when they say our expectation a little bit, and actually the admin GUI is a prime example of it, is that somebody builds a web UI using React or Angular or whatever framework they like, which ends up with a bunch of static files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, which you have to put somewhere. And to make this easy, there is a defined directory on the Keep server where you can put your files in, and then they will be available using the respective URL as a static web application. So it just loads, and then it's the job of the JavaScript you have in your application then to talk to the Keep API for authentication, data access, and the likes. Initially, when we started, I kept the admin GUI on a external HTTP server and proxying things through until, like, say, we realized this is an extra complication. So you might want to, in a production environment, you might have the rule all static files go onto an Apache or an Nginx server. But to get started, you just need to have a place where the things are, and you don't want to fight with CORS. We can configure that. We took care of it, but it's another stumbling stone. So I said, okay, here's a directory. Put your files in, and then you can access that files from a URL on the same port on the same host address as the rest of Keep.
Good. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. The last one that just came in. Can anonymous or non-authenticated users get Domino data from Keep?
No.
Good, simple, quick answer. All right, Howard, back to you.
Okay, thanks. I think that is it. Just had a comment just came in that Eric suggested don't keep Keep, that's hard to say, tied to the Domino release schedule so you can get functionality more quicker than tying it to the Domino release schedule. So just for you guys to bring back to the team. So anyway, that is it for the questions. We'll put the recording of this up on the OpenNTF website within a day or two. And please join us for our August webinar. and hopefully hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. And thanks to Paul and Stephan for coming and presenting about Keep. There's a lot of stuff to learn here, and I think we're looking forward to seeing how this rolls out and compare this to some of the other, API options. So have a great rest of your day, and Graham and Jesse, thanks for co-hosting.
You bet. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.